When Marcus Reed discovered he had a 14-year-old son, his vast fortune couldn't buy the one thing the grieving boy needed. The night janitor's raw truth shattered the boardroom's composure and transformed a corporate titan forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, staring at the city sprawled before him like a glittering chessboard. 58 stories below, people moved like ants, unaware they were being observed by the man whose decisions shaped their futures. The afternoon sun caught on the glass and steel of neighboring skyscrapers, bouncing back rays that seemed to crown his empire. "Sir?" His executive assistant's voice barely registered. "The board is waiting." Marcus nodded without turning. He knew they were waiting. They'd been waiting for 20 minutes now, an unheard-of breach of protocol for the notoriously punctual CEO of Horizon Industries. $62 billion in assets, operations in 47 countries, and a personal fortune that had landed him on the cover of Forbes 3 times in the last decade. Yet here he was, frozen, unable to face a dozen men and women who reported to him, because today was different. Today, Marcus Reed had received the call that changed everything. "Sir?" His assistant's voice was tentative now. "Should I tell them you'll be another few minutes?" No. His voice was steady despite the earthquake in his chest. "I'm coming." The boardroom fell silent as he entered. 12 faces turned toward him, expectant, curious about the delay. Marcus moved to his place at the head of the table, set down his leather portfolio, and remained standing. "I apologize for keeping you waiting," he began. His voice, trained through years of speeches and negotiations, carried effortlessly across the room. "Before we begin the quarterly review, I have an announcement." He paused, feeling the weight of their attention. These people knew him as relentless, decisive, sometimes ruthless. They knew the CEO who had quadrupled the company's market cap in 8 years. They didn't know the man who had stood paralyzed at his window, trying to breathe. "As of this morning, I've been informed that I have a 14-year-old son." The silence in the room deepened, became something physical. A few board members exchanged glances. Eleanor Walsh, the 70-year-old chairwoman who had seen 3 CEOs come and go, raised a single silver eyebrow. "His mother was someone I knew briefly 15 years ago," Marcus continued. "She passed away last week. Cancer. There was a letter. DNA confirmation ... It's all quite definitive. His name is Eli. He's arriving from Seattle on Friday." Marcus finally sat, the action feeling strangely mechanical. "Obviously, this is unexpected, but it won't affect Horizon's operations or my leadership. Now let's proceed with the quarterly." For the next 2 hours, Marcus guided the meeting with his usual precision. Profit margins were dissected. New market strategies debated. The Asia expansion timeline approved. Not once did his focus waver. Not once did his voice betray the storm inside him. But when the last board member filed out and Eleanor Walsh paused at the door, her knowing eyes holding his for a beat longer than necessary, something in him cracked. "Eleanor?" he said. "A moment?" She closed the door and returned to her seat, folding her hands on the table. I was wondering when the real conversation would begin. Marcus had known Eleanor since he was 26, a hungry upstart with more ambition than experience. She had been his mentor, then his ally, eventually his friend, though neither would ever use that word. "I have no idea how to be a father," he admitted, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. Eleanor's face softened slightly. "Few men do at first." "This isn't at first. This is 14 years in. He's a teenager I've never met, whose mother just died. And now he's stuck with me, a stranger who didn't even know he existed until this morning. You've built a global corporation from the ground up. You've navigated economic collapses, hostile takeovers, and technological revolutions. You'll figure out how to raise one boy." Marcus shook his head. "This isn't a business problem. You can't strategize fatherhood. You can't delegate it or optimize it or scale it." "No," Eleanor agreed, "you cannot. My own father was ... single." Quotes. Marcus stopped. He never spoke about his father. "Not a model I care to follow." Eleanor studied him, her gaze uncomfortably perceptive. "There are books, therapists, parenting classes, though I imagine the press would have a field day with that. I don't need a how-to manual. I need ... single quotes." He trailed off, uncertain what he needed. "Perhaps," Eleanor said carefully, "what you need is perspective. Not from me, not from your usual circle." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected places." She stood, smoothing her impeccable suit. "My father was a factory worker. He never finished high school, but he was the wisest man I've ever known." With that cryptic statement, she left, leaving Marcus alone with a problem no amount of money or power could solve. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. A bedroom was furnished in his penthouse, decorated by an interior designer who specialized in teen-friendly spaces. A private school was selected. A child psychologist was consulted about trauma and transition. A team of lawyers prepared guardianship paperwork. Marcus approached fatherhood like a corporate acquisition, methodical and thorough. But with each passing hour, the knot in his stomach tightened. Thursday evening found him working late, the Horizon Tower nearly empty except for the cleaning staff. Marcus barely noticed the older man who entered his office until the quiet squeak of the mop bucket broke his concentration. "Sorry, sir," the janitor said, beginning to back out. I can come back." "No, it's fine," Marcus said, waving him in. "Go ahead." The janitor nodded and began his work, moving with the efficient rhythm of someone who had cleaned thousands of offices. Marcus returned to his laptop, but found himself watching the man from the corner of his eye. There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a presence that seemed at odds with his blue uniform. He moved deliberately, respectfully around the space, careful not to disturb anything on the desk. As he worked, he hummed softly, a melody Marcus couldn't place. "You've been here a while, haven't you?" Marcus found himself asking. The janitor looked up, surprised. "Yes, sir. 17 years next month." "What's your name?" "Frank. Frank Wilson." Marcus nodded, then hesitated. Something compelled him to continue the conversation. "Do you have children, Frank?" Frank's weathered face softened. "3, all grown now." "And 5 grandkids?" "5, Marcus repeated. "That must be ... challenging." Frank chuckled. A warm, genuine sound rarely heard on the executive floor. "Challenging, yes, but the best kind of challenging." Marcus closed his laptop. "May I ask you something, Frank? Something personal?" Frank set his mop aside, sensing the shift in the conversation. "Of course, sir. How did you learn to be a father?" The question hung in the air between them, the billionaire CEO and the night shift janitor, separated by 58 floors of hierarchy, yet suddenly connected by the most fundamental of human experiences. Frank didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I didn't learn all at once," he finally said. "I learned day by day. Sometimes I got it right. Many times I got it wrong." Marcus leaned forward. "But how did you know what to do? What decisions to make?" Frank's eyes crinkled at the corners. "With all due respect, Mr. Reed, raising children isn't about making the right decisions. It's about being there when they face the consequences of their own decisions." Something about the simplicity of this statement struck Marcus with unexpected force. "My oldest boy," Frank continued, reaching into his back pocket for his wallet. "He's a doctor now, but at 14 he was angry at the world. His mother and I worked long hours. He felt abandoned, I think." Frank pulled out a worn photograph and handed it across the desk. A teenage boy with Frank's eyes stared back at Marcus, sullen and defensive. "That was taken the day after he got suspended for fighting," Frank explained. "I was so mad I couldn't see straight. Wanted to ground him until he was 30. Marcus studied the photo. "What did you do instead?" "I took him fishing," Frank said with a small smile. "Sat in a boat with him for 8 hours. Barely caught anything. But somewhere around hour 6 he started talking, really talking, and I just listened." Frank reached for the photo, his fingers lingering on it for a moment. "Sometimes being a father isn't about having answers. It's about being willing to sit in the silence until your child finds their own." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a perspective tilting in a way he hadn't expected. He'd been approaching fatherhood like a problem to solve, not a relationship to build. "Tomorrow," Marcus said quietly, "my son is arriving. A boy I've never met. His mother just died, and suddenly I'm all he has. He's 14, just like your son in that picture." Frank's expression changed, compassion replacing surprise. "That's a hard age, for him and for you." "I have no idea what I'm doing," Marcus admitted, the confession easier to this stranger than it had been to Eleanor. "Everyone expects me to have a plan, a strategy. I always do. But with this..." "Mr. Reed," Frank interrupted gently, "children don't need perfect fathers. They need present ones." Marcus looked up, struck by the quiet certainty in the older man's voice. "Be there," Frank continued, "even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. The rest will figure out as you go." The simplicity of this wisdom, delivered without pretense or agenda, hit Marcus with unexpected clarity. For days, he'd been drowning in complexity and planning and preparation, when perhaps what his son needed most was simply his presence, not his solutions or his resources, but him. "Thank you, Frank," he said, the words inadequate for the perspective shift he'd just experienced. Frank nodded, returning to his mop. As he moved toward the door, he paused. "One more thing, Mr. Reed. When you make mistakes, and you will apologize, that's how they learn to forgive themselves when they make their own." After Frank left, Marcus sat motionless in his silent office. For the first time since receiving the call, the panic had subsided. In its place was something unfamiliar, not confidence exactly, but a willingness to step into the unknown one day at a time. The janitor's wisdom, offered without judgment, had accomplished what boards of directors and executive coaches never could. It had reminded Marcus Reed, master of the corporate universe, that some things cannot be mastered, only experienced with humility and presence. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, but tonight, for the first time, Marcus felt ready to meet them. Friday arrived with a clarity of purpose that surprised Marcus. He woke before dawn, his mind unusually quiet. Outside his penthouse windows, the city was still draped in darkness, punctuated by the glittering constellations of skyscraper lights. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't immediately reach for his phone to check overnight markets or urgent emails. Instead, he stood at the window, watching the first blush of sunrise paint the eastern sky. Today, Eli would arrive. The drive to the airport was a blur of nervous anticipation. Marcus had sent his usual driver away, choosing instead to go himself. It was Frank's voice in his head. Be there, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. LaGuardia's private terminal was designed to spare the wealthy and powerful the indignities of commercial travel. No lines, no crowds, no questions. Marcus waited in a sleek lounge, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in front of him. When the door finally opened, he wasn't prepared. The boy was tall for 14, with lanky limbs that seemed slightly too long for his body. Dark hair fell across his forehead, partially obscuring eyes that were unmistakably like Marcus's own. He wore jeans, a faded band t-shirt, and a wary expression that made him look both younger and older than his years. A social worker in a sensible pantsuit stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Marcus rose, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Eli, he said, the name still new in his mouth. I'm Marcus Reed. The boy nodded once, his eyes darting around the room, cataloging exits, measuring distances, fight or flight calculations made visible. Hello, Eli said simply, his voice caught in that liminal space between child and man. The social worker stepped forward with a warm, practiced smile. Reed, I'm Vanessa Cooper. We spoke on the phone. Eli's had a long flight, but he's been very brave about everything. Marcus nodded, unsure what the protocol was for receiving custody of a teenage son you'd never met. Should he shake Eli's hand? Hug him? Both options seemed equally impossible. Are you hungry? He asked instead. We could stop somewhere on the way home. Eli shrugged, the universal teenage gesture of non-commitment. The social worker filled the awkward silence. I have some paperwork for you to sign, Mr. Reed, and I'd like to see where Eli will be staying, just as a formality. Of course, Marcus said, relieved to have a clear task. Paperwork and property tours were familiar territory. The ride to the penthouse was quiet. Eli stared out the window, his face revealing nothing as the Manhattan skyline rose around them. Marcus found himself searching for words, for questions that wouldn't sound invasive or trite. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms, to speaking with unflinching authority to presidents and prime ministers. Yet here, in his own car with his own son, he was mute. The tour of the penthouse was equally stilted, Marcus showed. Eli, the bedroom that had been prepared for him, a designer's vision of adolescent taste with its carefully curated, casual aesthetic that had cost more than most people's entire homes. You can change anything you don't like, Marcus said, watching Eli's face for a reaction. Different furniture, colors, whatever you want. Eli nodded again, setting his battered backpack on the pristine duvet. It's fine, he said, the first words he'd spoken since the airport. After the social worker left, satisfied with the living arrangements and paperwork, the true weight of the situation descended. They were alone together, father and son, strangers. Are you hungry now? Marcus asked again, grasping for the most basic of caretaking gestures. I guess, Eli replied. Marcus led him to the kitchen, an expansive space of marble and stainless steel that was used primarily by his private chef. He realized with a jolt of dismay that there was almost no food in the house. He rarely ate at home, and when he did, meals were prepared and delivered. I could order something, he offered, already reaching for his phone. Whatever, Eli said, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the countertop. Marcus ordered pizza, remembering from the social worker's brief that Eli liked pepperoni. It felt like a pathetically small piece of knowledge to have about his own child. While they waited for the food, Marcus gave Eli a tablet preloaded with streaming services, games, and educational apps that the child psychologist had recommended. There's Wi-Fi throughout the apartment. Password is on the back of the tablet. Eli took the device without comment and retreated to his room. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded like thunder in the silent apartment. Marcus stood alone in the hallway, a tidal wave of inadequacy washing over him. He had prepared a space, arranged for schools, hired tutors and therapists, set up trust funds and legal guardianships, but he hadn't prepared himself for the reality of a grieving, displaced teenager who clearly didn't want to be here. Frank's words returned. Asterisk children don't need perfect fathers. They need present ones. Asterisk present. What did that even mean? He was physically here in the same apartment, but the gulf between them seemed unbridgeable. The weekend passed in a fog of awkward meals, monosyllabic exchanges, and long stretches of silence. Eli spent most of his time in his room. Marcus found himself inventing reasons to check on him, knocking softly to offer snacks or ask if he needed anything. The answers were always the same. No thanks, or I'm fine, or just a headshake. By Monday morning, Marcus was desperate for the familiar rhythms of work. He had arranged for Eli to start at his new school the following week, giving them time to adjust to their new reality. But there was no adjustment happening, only a polite, painful détente. I have to go to the office today, Marcus said over a breakfast that neither of them was eating. You'll be okay here? The housekeeper's coming at 10. There's food in the fridge now, and you have my number if you need anything. Eli nodded, not looking up from his untouched toast. I won't be late, Marcus added, though he had no idea what late meant in this context. He'd never had anyone waiting for him at home before. At Horizon Tower, Marcus moved through his day with mechanical efficiency. Meetings blurred together. Reports were reviewed. Decisions were made, but his mind kept returning to the silent boy in his penthouse, alone in a strange city with a father he didn't know. Around 6, Eleanor Walsh appeared in his doorway. You missed the Sustainability Committee meeting, she said without preamble. Marcus looked up, startled. What? No, that's Thursday. It was rescheduled. The memo went out Friday. Her sharp eyes studied him. How's the boy? Marcus rubbed his face. He's quiet. Understandably, I suppose. His mother just died. and now he's living with a stranger. Eleanor took a seat without being invited. And how are you? I'm fine. Liar. The word held no judgment, only certainty. You look like hell, Marcus. He managed a wry smile. Thank you for that assessment. Have you talked to him? Really talked? I've tried. He didn't say much. Eleanor leaned forward. Have you told him about yourself? Not the corporate biography version, the real story. Marcus stiffened. Why would I do that? Because children need to know they come from somewhere, that they belong to something larger than themselves, especially when they've lost so much. Before Marcus could respond, there was a soft knock at his open door. Frank Wilson stood there, mop in hand. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Reed, Miss Walsh. He nodded respectfully to both of them. Eleanor rose. No interruption, Frank, I was just leaving. She gave Marcus a pointed look. Think about what I said. After she left, Frank began his usual routine, moving quietly around the office. How's your son, Mr. Reed? He asked after a few minutes, if you don't mind me asking. Marcus sighed. He arrived Friday. He barely speaks. He stays in his room. I don't know how to reach him. Frank nodded thoughtfully. First days are always the hardest. For both of you. What if I can't do this? The question escaped before Marcus could contain a traw. Vulnerable in a way he never allowed himself to be. Frank stopped mopping, leaning slightly on the handle as he considered the question with the same seriousness he'd shown before. Mr. Reed, when my middle child was born, she cried for 3 months straight. Colic, the doctors said. Nothing to be done but wait it out. My wife and I were exhausted, desperate. One night I was pacing the floor with this screaming baby and I thought, I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. Marcus waited, oddly comforted by the janitor's calm recounting. Then I realized I was already doing it. Not perfectly, not even well maybe, but I was doing it. I was there, holding her, walking the floor at 3 a.m. when everything in me wanted to put her down and walk away. Frank's eyes crinkled. That's all fatherhood is, Mr. Reed. Showing up when it's hard, day after day. The simplicity of it struck Marcus again, this wisdom that couldn't be purchased or acquired through power. What's her name? Your middle child? He asked. Sophia, Frank said, his face softening. She's a teacher now, still stubborn as the day is long. Marcus smiled, a genuine one this time. Thank you, Frank. As the janitor turned to leave, Marcus made a sudden decision. Frank, would you come to dinner at my home tomorrow night? I'd like you to meet Eli, if that's not too strange a request. Frank looked surprised, then thoughtful. Not strange at all, Mr. Reed. I'd be honored. That evening, Marcus left the office earlier than he had in years. On the way home, he stopped at a bookstore and spent 30 minutes selecting a book about astronomy after remembering a detail. From The Social Workers, Phil Eli had once wanted to be an astronomer. When he arrived home, the penthouse was quiet. He found Eli in his room, headphones on, sketching in a notebook. He knocked on the open door. Eli looked up, pulling one headphone aside. I brought you something, Marcus said, holding out the book. The social worker mentioned you were interested in astronomy. Eli's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He took the book, turning it over in his hands. Thanks, he said, and for the first time the words seemed to contain something more than obligation. I invited someone to dinner tomorrow, Marcus continued. A colleague. I thought you might like to meet him. Eli looked wary. One of your business partners? No, Marcus said, smiling slightly. Someone who's teaching me a few things about being a father. The next evening, Marcus found himself in the unusual position of preparing for a dinner guest. He'd ordered from his regular chef service, requesting something a teenager might enjoy along with wine for the adults. The dining room table, a 12-foot slab of rare wood that had been used exactly twice since he'd purchased the penthouse, was set for 3. Eli emerged from his room at the sound of the doorbell, his curiosity apparently stronger than his desire for solitude. He hung back in the hallway, watching as Marcus opened the door. Frank Wilson stood there, no longer in his blue uniform but in neatly pressed slacks and a button-down shirt. He carried a small, plainly wrapped package. Good evening, Mr. Reed, he said with a warm smile. His eyes moved past Marcus to Eli and his smile deepened. And you must be Eli. I'm Frank Wilson. Eli nodded. The wariness in his eyes mingled with something else, confusion, perhaps, at the sight of this clearly working-class man in their rarefied space. Frank works at Horizon, Marcus explained, gesturing him inside. He's been there longer than I have, 17 years next month, Frank confirmed, stepping into the foyer. He held out the package to Eli, a welcome gift, nothing fancy. Eli hesitated, then accepted it with a mumbled thanks. He unwrapped it slowly to reveal a model telescope kit. Your father mentioned you were interested in astronomy, Frank said. My grandson built one of these last year. He loves it. Eli's expression softened slightly. Cool, thank you. Marcus led them to the dining room, where the chef's creations awaited. Gourmet burgers, truffle fries, and artisanal milkshakes that managed to be simultaneously nostalgic and sophisticated. The first few minutes were awkward. Marcus realized he knew almost nothing about Frank beyond their brief conversation. Eli knew nothing about either man. The silence stretched like taffy, threatening to harden into permanence. Then Frank leaned forward. So, Eli, your father says you're from Seattle. Beautiful city. I visited once, years ago. All that green and the water everywhere. Eli nodded. Yeah, it's different from here. You miss it? Frank asked, his tone gentle but direct. Eli shrugged, then surprised Marcus by actually responding. Parts of it, my friends. My school, a pause. Our apartment, that's natural, Frank said. Home is home, and New York takes some getting used to. Loud, fast, Everyone in a hurry. Yeah, Eli agreed, a flicker of animation crossing his face. Everyone walks so fast here. New Yorkers think if you're not running, you're standing still. Frank chuckled. Took me years to adjust when I moved here from Georgia. You're from Georgia? Marcus asked, realizing how little he knew about a man who had cleaned his office for nearly 2 decades. Born and raised in Savannah, Frank confirmed. Came north for work in my 20s. Never meant to stay, but then I met my wife, had our first child, and here we are. He turned back to Eli. What was your neighborhood like in Seattle? Fremont, Eli said. It's kind of I don't know, artsy, I guess. There's this big troll statue under a bridge and a rocket, and this statue of Lenin that they dress up for holidays. He glanced at Marcus as if suddenly self-conscious about sharing. Sounds like a place with character, Frank said. My neighborhood in the Bronx isn't fancy, but it's got spirit. There's an old man on my block who plays saxophone on his stoop every Sunday, rain or shine. Been doing it for 30 years. The conversation flowed more easily after that. Frank had a gift for asking questions that invited stories rather than one-word answers. By dessert, Eli had shared more about his life in Seattle than he had in the 4 days since his arrival, his favorite park with a view of Mount Rainier, a teacher who'd encouraged his interest in astronomy, the stray cat that visited their apartment balcony every morning. Marcus found himself both grateful and oddly envious of Frank. Easy way with Eli. He noticed how the janitor never pushed for more than Eli offered, how he listened with his whole attention, how he shared his own stories with a humility that made them relatable rather than performative. After dinner, Eli asked if he could start assembling his telescope. Marcus agreed, and the boy retreated to his room, the first genuine spark of enthusiasm Marcus had seen from him. Thank you, Marcus said quietly when they were alone. He's talked more tonight than he has all weekend. Frank nodded, swirling the last of his wine. He's a good kid, just lost, grieving his mother, his home, his whole life as he knew it. I don't know how to help him, Marcus admitted. Frank was quiet for a moment. Can I ask you something, Mr. Reed? Of course. And please call me Marcus. Have you asked him about his mother? Marcus stiffened. No, I didn't want to upset him. Grief doesn't work that way, Frank said gently. It's already there, whether you talk about it or not. Sometimes the worst pain is feeling like the person you've lost is being erased, forgotten. Marcus looked down at his hands, realizing with a jolt that in his desperate attempt to move forward, to establish a relationship with Eli, he'd avoided any mention of Jennifer, the woman who had once meant enough to him that they'd created a life together, however briefly. I barely knew her, he said, his voice low. It was a short relationship. She moved to Seattle before she knew she was pregnant. She never told me. But she was Eli's whole world, Frank said. His mother, the center of his universe for 14 years. The truth of this settled over Marcus with a heaviness he hadn't anticipated. What do I say to him? I don't have memories to share. I wasn't there. Frank reached into his back pocket and withdrew his wallet again. From it, he carefully removed a faded photograph of a young woman with his eyes and smile. My first wife, Grace, he said, handing the photo to Marcus. She died when our children were young. Cancer, like Eli's mother. Marcus studied the image, feeling the weight of Frank's loss. I'm sorry. When she died, I didn't know how to talk about her with our kids. It's hurt too much. But then my oldest asked me one night if I was trying to make them forget their mother. Frank's voice caught slightly. That broke. Children need permission to remember, to grieve. They need to know the people who love them aren't forgotten. But I didn't know Jennifer, Marcus repeated. No, Frank agreed, but Eli did. Ask him about her. Let him tell you who she was. Marcus was silent, absorbing this insight that was so obvious yet had eluded him completely. There's one more thing I want to say, if that's all right, Frank continued. Please. 14 is a hard age. Not a child anymore, not yet a man. Everything changing, body, emotions, the world around him. And Eli's going through all that while also losing his mother and adjusting father. A new city. Frank leaned forward, his eyes kind but serious. He needs structure, boundary, but he also needs grace. Room to make mistakes. To be angry sometimes. I don't know how to balance that, Marcus confessed. Nobody does perfectly, Frank said with a small smile. You just do your best day by day. Make the rules clear. Stick to them, but leave room for mercy. As the evening wound down, Marcus walked Frank to the door. The janitor paused in the foyer, glancing toward the hallway where Eli's room was. Thank you for dinner, Marcus. It was a pleasure meeting your son. Thank you for coming. And for, Marcus gestured vaguely, unable to articulate the depth of his gratitude for Frank's wisdom, his ease with Eli, his unassuming guidance. Frank seemed to understand. He clasped Marcus's shoulder briefly. I meant what I said yesterday. You're already doing it, just by being here. By trying. That's fatherhood. After Frank left, Marcus stood in the quiet apartment, contemplating the closed door to Eli's room. Frank's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk children need permission to remember, to grieve. They need to know the people who love them aren't forgotten. Asterisk taking a deep breath. He walked down the hall and knocked softly. Come in, Eli called. The boy was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by parts of the telescope kit. He looked up when Marcus entered, his expression guarded but not hostile. How's it going? Marcus asked, nodding toward the half-assembled telescope. Good, Eli said. The instructions are pretty clear, Dots. Single quotes. Marcus hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. I liked Frank, he said. He has a way of making complicated things seem simpler. Eli nodded, turning a small lens in his hands. He's nice. Not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know. One of those guys in suits who's always at your table in those magazine photos. Marcus smiled slightly. I have plenty of those, but Frank is different. He sees things I miss. A silence fell between them, not quite as strained as before. Marcus gathered his courage. Eli, I wanted to ask you about your mom, he said quietly. Eli's hands stilled. He looked up, surprise and wariness mingling in his expression. What about her? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. I'd like to know about her. What she was like, what you remember. Eli studied him, as if assessing his sincerity. Why? Because she was your mother, Marcus said simply. Because she raised you. And because... good quotes. He hesitated, then pushed through, because even though I didn't know her as an adult, she was once important to me too. Eli was silent for so long that Marcus thought he wouldn't respond. Then slowly he reached for his backpack beside the bed and pulled out a small, worn photo album. She kept this, he said, opening it to reveal photos of a younger, smiling Jennifer. She liked taking pictures, said memories were the most important thing we own. Marcus moved to the floor beside Eli. Careful to maintain a respectful distance. Would you show me? As Eli turned the pages, pointing out moments from a life Marcus had never known. Birthdays, school plays, camping trips. Something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic, not a sudden breakthrough or emotional revelation. It was subtler, a small crack in the wall that separated them, allowing a thin beam of light to pass through. They weren't father and son, not yet. That would take time, trust, shared experiences that hadn't happened. But sitting on the floor of a too-perfect bedroom, looking at fragments of a life cut short, they were no longer complete strangers. It was a beginning. The morning after Frank's visit, Marcus woke to the unfamiliar sound of movement in the kitchen. He found Eli there, searching through cabinets, a look of mild frustration on his face. What are you looking for? Marcus asked. Eli startled slightly. Cereal bowls? Or just cereal, I guess. Marcus realized with a pang that in all his meticulous preparations, he hadn't thought about the mundane realities of daily life with a teenager. His own breakfast was usually coffee at his desk, if anything at all. Let's go out, he suggested impulsively. There's a diner a few blocks away. Then we could stop at the grocery store, get whatever you like for the apartment. Eli hesitated, then nodded. Okay. The diner was busy with the morning rush, filled with the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations. They slid into a booth by the window and Marcus watched as Eli studied the laminated menu with careful attention. Order whatever you want, Marcus said. When the waitress came, Eli ordered chocolate chip pancakes. Marcus asked for black coffee and wheat toast. As they waited, an awkward silence settled between them again. So, Marcus began, reaching for the conversational tools that had served him in business. What are you looking forward to about your new school? Eli shrugged. Nothing really. It's one of the best schools in the city, Marcus offered. Great academic program, excellent college placement. Mom and I were looking at this astronomy program at my old school for next year, Eli said quietly. They have a partnership with the observatory. You can do an internship there. Marcus felt the first stirrings of a plan. I could look into something similar here. I know people at the Hayden Planetarium. They might have programs for students. Eli looked up, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Really? Absolutely. I'll make some calls today. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. A shared goal, something concrete Marcus could do to help Eli adjust. After breakfast, they wandered through the grocery store, filling a cart with foods that revealed Eli's preferences, a specific brand of cereal, peanut butter without chunks, spicy chips that made Marcus raise an eyebrow. My mom didn't like spicy stuff, Eli explained, something vulnerable in his voice. But I do, Marcus nodded, adding the chips to their cart without comment, recognizing the small act of independence for what it was. Later that day at the office, Marcus found himself unusually distracted. Between meetings, he called the director of the Hayden Planetarium, leveraging his name and position to arrange a private tour for Eli. He researched astronomy programs for teenagers, bookmarking several for them to look at together. When Frank arrived that evening for his usual cleaning routine, Marcus was on the phone with his assistant, finalizing details for the planetarium visit. That sounds perfect, he said. Email me the confirmation. He hung up and turned to Frank with an unexpected sense of accomplishment. Eli and I are going to the planetarium tomorrow. He's interested in astronomy. Frank smiled, his eyes crinkling. That's good. Finding common ground. I don't know anything about astronomy, Marcus admitted, but I can learn. That's even better, Frank replied. Shows him you're willing to step into his world, not just bring him into yours. The wisdom in this simple observation struck Marcus. How often in business had he expected others to adapt to his expectation, his pace, his vision? How rarely had he made the effort to truly understand their perspectives? There's a board meeting tomorrow afternoon, Marcus said, changing the subject. The quarterly review. I need to be there, but I promised Eli this planetarium visit. Reschedule the board, Frank suggested, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. Marcus stared at him. The board of directors? I can't just... Why not? Frank asked, genuinely curious. You're the CEO, aren't you? Yes, but there are 12 directors flying in from around the world. The date's been set for months. Frank nodded, continuing his work. My mistake. I just thought since you told Eli you'd take him ... Single quotes, the implication hung in the air. Marcus felt a twist of discomfort. You think I should prioritize the planetarium over a critical board meeting? Frank paused, leaning on his mop handle. When my kids were growing up, I worked 2 jobs. I missed things, baseball games, school plays. Each time I had a good reason. We needed the money. But you know what they remember now? Not the reasons. Just that I wasn't there. Marcus was silent. absorbing this. Of course, that's different, Frank continued. I wasn't the CEO. I couldn't reschedule my shifts. The subtle challenge in those words lingered with Marcus long after Frank had gone. That night, he sat in his home office, staring at his calendar. The board meeting represented everything he'd worked for: power, control, respect. The planetarium was just an afternoon with a boy who barely knew him. Yet Frank's words echoed, "Children need present fathers." With a decisive click. Marcus sent an email to Eleanor and the board secretary. "Need to reschedule tomorrow's meeting to Friday. Family commit. My apologies for the late notice." The responses came quickly. A few perfunctory acknowledgments, a rescheduling of flights and hotels, and from Eleanor a single line, "About time," the next day. As Marcus and Eli stood beneath the vast projection of stars at the planetarium watching galaxies swirl above them, Marcus felt a strange sense of rightness. Eli's face, illuminated by the artificial cosmos, showed a wonder that made him look younger, more like the child he still partly was. "That's Betelgeuse," Eli whispered, pointing. "It's a red supergiant. When it goes supernova, it'll be so bright we'll be able to see it during the day." Marcus followed his gaze, seeing not just a bright dot but a dying star through his son's eyes. "How do they know it will go supernova?" Eli launched into an explanation of stellar life cycles, his words tumbling over each other with enthusiasm. Marcus listened, asking questions not because he particularly cared about nuclear fusion or stellar mass, but because he wanted to hear his son's voice, animated and alive. By the time they returned to the penthouse, something had shifted again. The wall between them hadn't fallen, but another crack had formed, another beam of light passing through. Friday's rescheduled board meeting arrived with a tension Marcus hadn't anticipated. News of his last-minute rescheduling had rippled through the executive floor. He could feel the curiosity, the speculation. Marcus Reed, who had once conducted a merger negotiation via video conference from a hospital bed after an appendectomy, had postponed a board meeting for a family commitment. The board members filed in, their expressions carefully neutral. Marcus began the meeting with his usual efficiency, moving through the agenda with precision. The quarterly numbers were strong. The Asia expansion was ahead of schedule. The sustainability initiative was gaining traction. Then came the unexpected question from James Harrington, a director known for his bluntness. "I think we're all curious, Marcus. What was this family commitment that couldn't wait? Some of us rearranged significant schedules." A hush fell over the room. In the past, Marcus would have bristled at the implied criticism, perhaps reminded Harrington that the CEO's schedule took precedence. Instead, he found himself thinking of Frank's quiet confidence, his unapologetic prioritization of what mattered. "My son wanted to see the planetarium," Marcus said simply. "He's interested in astronomy. I promised I'd take him." Single quotes Harrington's eyebrows. "You postponed a meeting of this magnitude for a trip to the planetarium?" "Yes," Marcus said, finding strength in the simplicity of the truth. "I did, but surely you could have—" "James," Eleanor interjected, her voice sharp, "consider carefully what you're about to suggest. That Marcus should have broken a promise to his recently bereaved 14-year-old son because we adults couldn't adjust our schedules?" Harrington fell silent. "If I may," Marcus continued, "I've been thinking about our discussion of corporate values last quarter. We talked about integrity, excellence, innovation, but I've realized there's a value missing from our list." He stood, moving to the whiteboard. With a marker, he wrote a single word: presence. We pride ourselves on being forward-thinking, on anticipating market trends 5-10 years ahead, but there's power in being fully present in the moment, with our clients, with our teams. He paused. "With our families." Marcus reached into his pocket and withdrew his phone. He pulled up a photo he'd taken at the planetarium Eli, his face tilted up to the artificial stars, a rare smile illuminating his features. "This is my son, Eli," he said, showing the image to the board members. "Many of you know I recently learned of his existence. His mother died last week. He's living with me now, a stranger in a strange city." The room was silent, the usual rustle of papers and tap of laptops stilled. "I've spent 20 years building this company," Marcus continued. "I've sacrificed evenings, weekends, relationships. I've been proud of that dedication. But on Wednesday I had a choice: be the CEO you all expect or be the father my son needs." He set the phone down, his voice steady. "I chose to be present for my son, and I don't regret it." To Marcus's surprise, Diana Chun, the normally stoic CFO, wiped discreetly at her eyes. James Harrington looked down at his hands. Eleanor's face held a gentle approval he'd never seen before. "I'm not suggesting we abandon our commitments or lower our standards," Marcus clarified, "but I am proposing that we expand our understanding of what excellence means. Sometimes it means being where you're needed most, even if that's not where you're expected." After the meeting, Eleanor lingered behind. "That was unexpected," she said, "and exactly what this room needed to hear." "Frank's influence," Marcus admitted. "The janitor," Eleanor smiled. "Sometimes wisdom comes from unexpected places." As Marcus gathered his materials, he noticed something had changed. The weight of perpetual urgency that had driven him for decades had shifted slightly. The world hadn't ended because a meeting was postponed. The company hadn't collapsed because he'd taken an afternoon off. He thought of Eli, of the small smile when they'd spotted Betelgeuse together, of the casual "thanks, Dad" that had slipped out when Marcus bought him a book at the planetarium shop. The first time Eli had called him Dad. Some things, Marcus was beginning to understand, couldn't be measured on quarterly reports or annual projections. Some kinds of growth happened in moments, in the spaces between words, in promises kept. The weeks that followed brought a gradual thawing between Marcus and Eli. Small moments accumulated: a shared laugh over a movie, a tentative conversation about school, the routine of having breakfast together before Marcus left for work. They weren't close. Not yet, but they were no longer complete strangers occupying the same space. Eli had started at his new school, navigating the complex social hierarchy with quiet resilience. Marcus found himself learning a new language, the language of permission slips and parent-teacher conferences, of adolescent moods and teenage independence. Frank remained a steady presence, offering guidance without overstepping. His gentle wisdom had become something Marcus relied on, sought out even. The janitor never seemed surprised when the CEO of Horizon Industries lingered in his office after hours, waiting for the man with the mop to share his thoughts on everything from homework battles to appropriate curfew. One Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was in back-to-back meetings when his assistant slipped him a note. Eli's school called. He's in the nurse's office. Migraine. Needs to be picked up. Marcus glanced at his schedule: 2 more hours of meetings, then a dinner with potential investors. He thought of Frank's words about being present, about what children remember. "I need to step out," he told the room of executives. "Family emergency. Jenkins will take over." 20 minutes later, he was in the school nurse's office, finding Eli pale and squinting against the light, his face drawn with pain. "Hey," Marcus said softly, "let's get you home." In the car, Eli leaned his head against the cool window, eyes closed. "He didn't have to come," he mumbled. "I told him I could take a cab. I wanted to come," Marcus said simply. At home, Marcus helped Eli to his darkened room, brought him water and the migraine medication the nurse had mentioned. He pulled the blackout curtains closed, adjusted the temperature, and asked if Eli needed anything else. "No," Eli whispered. "Thanks." Marcus hesitated at the doorway. "I'll check on you in a bit. Try to sleep." He retreated to his home office, canceling his investor dinner and having his assistant reschedule the afternoon meetings. As the hours passed, he worked from home, periodically checking on Eli, who drifted in and out of a pain-filled sleep. By evening, the medication had begun to help. Eli emerged from his room, still pale but no longer wincing at every sound. "Feeling better?" Marcus asked. Eli nodded. "Yeah. Sorry about ... making you leave work. Don't apologize," Marcus said. "You needed me. That's more important than work." The words hung between them, simple but profound. Eli looked at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read: surprise, perhaps, or the dawning realization that this man he was still getting to know might actually put him first. "My mom used to get migraines too," Eli said after a moment. "Really bad ones." "I didn't know that," Marcus replied, recognizing the offering for what it was, a piece of Janitor, a connection to the past. "Yeah, she said they ran in her family. Guess I got them from her." Marcus nodded. "What did she do for them? Anything that helped beyond medication?" Question opened a door. For the next hour, they sat in the living room as Eli shared memories of his mother, her ritual of peppermint tea during migraine, her love of old black and white movies, her terrible singing voice that she nonetheless unleashed during car rides. Marcus listened, asking questions, absorbing the portrait of the woman who had raised his son. There was an ache in hearing about a life he hadn't been part of, but also a gratitude that Eli was willing to share it with him. The next day at work, Marcus found himself distracted, thoughts returning to Eli and the fragile bridge they were building. When Frank arrived for his evening rounds, Marcus was waiting. "Eli had a migraine yesterday," he said without preamble. "I left a board meeting to pick him up from school." Frank nodded, setting down his cleaning supplies. "That was the right call." "I know," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "That's not what I wanted to talk about. He told me about his mother last night. Stories. Memories." It was ... single quotes. He searched for the word. "Important." Frank smiled. "He's starting to trust you." "I still feel like I'm navigating in the dark," Marcus admitted. "Every conversation feels like walking through a minefield." "That's parenthood," Frank said with a soft chuckle. "Even when you've been there from the beginning, children are always becoming someone new, someone you have to get to know all over again." Marcus considered this. "Frank, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. You mentioned your first wife died when your children were young. How did you ... move forward, create a new life for them?" Frank set his mop aside and took a seat across from Marcus, an unprecedented breach of the hierarchical protocol that had once defined their relationship. "It wasn't easy," he said, his voice soft with memory. "There were days I felt like I was drowning. 3 children looking to me for answers I didn't have." Marcus nodded, recognizing the sentiment. "But eventually," Frank continued, "I realized something. I couldn't replace what they'd lost. I couldn't make the pain go away. All I could do was create space for something new to grow alongside the grief." "Something new," Marcus repeated. "Yes, new traditions, new memories, a new way of being a family." Frank's eyes grew distant. "The mistake is thinking you have to erase the past to build the future. You don't. You build around it, with it." Marcus thought of Eli sharing stories of Janitor, of the small shrine of photos the boy kept on his dresser. "How do I do that?" he asked. "Build something new with him?" Frank studied him thoughtfully. "You're already starting, but maybe what Eli needs now is to see you not just the CEO, the provider, the new guardian, but you, the person." "What do you mean?" "You've been learning about him, about his mother, but does he know anything about you? Where you came from? What shaped you?" Marcus stiffened slightly. "My past isn't exactly ... inspirational family storytelling. It's still part of who you are," Frank said gently. "Part of who he is too," whether he knows it yet or not. The words settled uncomfortably. Marcus's past was a carefully sealed vault. The poverty, the neglect, the father whose legacy he'd spent a lifetime overwriting with achievement and success. Even Eleanor, who had known him for decades, knew only the sanitized version. "I'm not suggesting you share everything at once," Frank added, noting Marcus's discomfort. "Just that authentic connection goes both ways." That night, Marcus sat in his home office long after Eli had gone to bed, thinking about Frank's words. On his desk was a small box he kept locked in his safe, containing the few artifacts of his childhood that he hadn't discarded: a baseball, a tarnished medal from a middle school science fair, a dog-eared photo of his mother. The next evening, as they ate dinner, Marcus cleared his throat. "I was thinking," he said, trying to sound casual, "maybe this weekend we could drive upstate. There's somewhere I'd like to show you." Eli looked up from his plate. "What place?" "It's a town called Millfield, about 2 hours north. It's where I grew up." Something flickered across Eli's face, curiosity. "Perhaps. I didn't know you grew up outside the city. There's a lot you don't know about me," Marcus said. "I thought maybe it's time I shared." Eli considered this. "Okay," he finally said. "Yeah, I'd like to see." Saturday morning found them in Marcus's rarely used Range Rover, heading north on the highway. As the dense urban landscape gave way to suburbs and eventually the rolling hills of upstate New York, Marcus felt an increasing tightness in his chest. He hadn't been back to Millfield in 20 years, had sworn never to return, yet here he was, driving voluntarily toward the place he'd spent his youth dreaming of escaping, with his son beside him. "So," Eli asked as they passed a sign indicating Millfield was 30 miles ahead, "what's it like, this town?" Marcus gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Small. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business. It used to be a factory town, but the factory closed when I was about your age. Hit the community hard. And your parents? Do they still live there?" "No," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "My mother died when I was 16. Cancer, like your mom. My father, he died about 10 years ago. We weren't close." Eli absorbed this. "I'm sorry." "About your mom, I mean?" "Thank you," Marcus said, glancing briefly at his son. "She would have liked you, I think. She was smart, like you. Always reading." As they crested a hill, the town came into view, a small cluster of buildings nestled in a valley, a church steeple rising above the tree line, the abandoned factory a hulking shadow on the outskirts. "Welcome to Millfield," Marcus said, feeling like a visitor to his own past. They drove slowly down Main Street, past storefronts that had changed hands but somehow looked exactly the same. Marcus pointed out landmarks from his youth: the library where he'd spent countless hours, the diner where he'd washed dishes for minimum wage, the high school with its faded brick facade. "It's smaller than I remembered," he murmured, more to himself than to Eli. They parked near the edge of town, and Marcus led Eli down a quiet residential street lined with modest homes, many in need of repair. He stopped in front of a small, shabby house with peeling paint and a sagging porch. "This was my house," he said quietly, "where I grew up." Eli stared at the rundown building, then back at Marcus in his perfectly tailored suit, his $1,000 watch, his carefully cultivated image of wealth and power. The contrast was stark, almost shocking. "You lived here?" Eli asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Until I was 18, Marcus confirmed. "It wasn't much, but it was home, at least while my mother was alive." They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the house. Marcus felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be, but there was also an unexpected relief in bringing these two parts of himself together, the boy from Millfield and the man he'd become. "Wanted to see the baseball field where I used to play?" he asked, needing to move, to shift away from the weight of memories the house evoked. As they walked through the town, Marcus found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone: how he'd worked 3 jobs to save for college, how he'd slept on a friend's couch in New York during his first internship because he couldn't afford rent, how he'd built Horizon from a tiny startup operating out of a converted garage. Eli listened, asking questions, his eyes tracking between this new version of Marcus and the surroundings that had shaped him. By the time they stopped for lunch at the old diner, still serving the same greasy burgers and milkshakes, something had shifted between them. "Why'd you want to show me all this?" Eli asked as they sat in a booth by the window. Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because it's part of who I am," he finally said. "And because ... because I want you to know me, not just the version of me that the world sees, but where I came from, what shaped me." He paused. "The good and the not so good." Eli nodded slowly, processing. "Thanks," he said simply, "for showing me." On the drive back to the city, as the towers of Manhattan appeared on the horizon, Eli turned to Marcus. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "How did you do it? Go from that house in Millfield to ... Single quotes. He gestured vaguely at the car, at Marcus himself, at the empire he'd built. Marcus thought of the easy answer: hard work, determination, intelligence, the story he told at commencement speeches and interviews. But Eli deserved more than platitudes. "One day at a time," he said honestly, "and I had help. People who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Teachers, mentors, friends." He thought of Eleanor, of how she'd taken a chance on a hungry kid from nowhere. "I didn't do it alone," even though that's the story I sometimes tell myself. As they pulled into the underground garage of their building, Eli asked one more question. "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" Marcus shut off the engine, sitting in the sudden silence. "Yes," he said finally. "I focused so much on proving myself, on building something that would outlast me, that I missed ... other things, connections, relationships." He looked at his son. But I'm trying to learn from those mistakes now. Eli held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, a gesture that contained neither judgment nor absolution, but something more valuable: understanding. As autumn deepened in New York, Marcus and Eli settled into a cautious rhythm. School days, weekend outing, quiet evenings in the penthouse that was slowly beginning to feel less like a showroom and more like a home. Small touches appear: Eli's astronomy books scattered on the coffee table, a pair of sneakers kicked off by the door, magnets from the planetarium holding takeout menus to the refrigerator. Marcus found himself changing too. He left the office by 6 most evenings. He learned to cook simple meals, much to Eli's amusement as he fumbled through recipes. He attended parent meetings at school, sitting among people whose net worth was a fraction of his, yet who seemed infinitely more comfortable in their parental roles. Throughout it all, Frank remained their quiet guide. His evening visits to Marcus's office had become an unspoken ritual. The janitor would arrive with his cart, and somehow the conversation would shift from market fluctuations to father-son dynamic, from corporate strategy to the strategy of raising a team. One evening in late October, Marcus was waiting when Frank arrived. "We had a fight," he said without preamble, his voice tight with frustration. "Eli wants to go to Seattle for Thanksgiving to visit his friend. I told him we should spend it here, establish our own traditions. It didn't go well." Frank nodded, setting aside his cleaning supplies. "First holidays are tough after a loss," he said. "For both of you." He says I don't understand, that I'm trying to erase his old life. Frank considered this. "Are you?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "No, I'm trying to build something new. Like you said, create space for something to grow alongside the grief, but on your terms," Frank pointed out gently. Marcus started to object, then stopped, recognizing the truth in Frank's observation. He'd approach Thanksgiving like a business problem: identify the goal, building a new family tradition, develop a strategy, hosting dinner in New York, implement without deviation. "I didn't consider what he wanted," Marcus admitted. "It's a natural mistake," Frank said. "We all do it. We decide what's best for our children based on what we think they, not what they're telling us they." Marcus rubbed his face. "So I just give in? Let him go to Seattle?" "Not necessarily," Frank replied. "But maybe there's a middle path. Have you asked why going back is so important to him?" Marcus realized he hadn't. He'd been so focused on the no that he hadn't explored the why behind Eli's request. That night he found Eli in his room, headphones on, sketching what appeared to be a star chart. Marcus knocked on the open door. "Can we talk?" he asked when Eli looked up. The boy shrugged, removing his headphones. The tension from their argument still lingered in the air. Marcus took a seat on the edge of the bed. "I wanted to ask, why is going to Seattle for Thanksgiving so important to you?" Eli seemed surprised by the question. He was silent for a moment, then said, "My mom's best friend Diane always hosted Thanksgivings like ... our tradition. All the people from our building would come, loud and crowded and ... single quotes." His voice caught. It was home. The simple admission hit Marcus with unexpected force. Of course Eli wanted to return to something familiar, something that connected him to his mother in his previous life. It wasn't about rejecting Marcus or their new relationship. It was about holding on to something precious that he feared losing. What if, Marcus suggested carefully, we did both? We could go to Seattle for Thanksgiving, spend it with your mom's friends. Then maybe some of those friends might visit us in New York for Christmas. The surprise on Eli's face shifted to cautious hope. "Really? You'd come to Seattle?" "Yes," Marcus said, realizing as he spoke that it was the right decision. "I'd like to meet the people who were important to you and your mom." The tension in Eli's shoulders visibly relaxed. "Kuna, Diane would like you, I think," he said tentatively. "She always said Mom should have told you about me." It was the first time Eli had voluntarily broached the subject of his mother's decision to keep his existence a secret. Marcus treaded carefully. "I wish she had," he said honestly. "But I understand why she might have been hesitant. I wasn't the man I am now." Eli studied him. "What were you like back then?" Marcus considered the question. "Ambitious, driven, completely focused on building my company. Not unlike how I was when you first arrived," he admitted. Eli nodded slowly. "You've changed," he said. It wasn't a question, but an observation. "I'm trying to," Marcus replied. Later that week, as Marcus was reviewing quarterly projections, his assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Sir, there's a situation at Eli's school." The principal called. There was an altercation. Marcus was in his car within minutes. At the school, he was directed to the administrative offices, where he found Eli sitting outside the principal's office, an ice pack held to his swollen jaw. Beside him was another boy with a bloody nose and the beginnings of a black eye. "What happened?" Marcus asked, kneeling before his son. Before Eli could answer, the principal emerged from her office. "Emmer, Reed, thank you for coming so quickly. If you and Eli would join me inside." In the office, the principal, Dr. Chun, explained that Eli and the other boy, Ryan, had been involved in a fight during lunch period. According to witnesses, she said Ryan made some comments about Eli's mother, and Eli responded physically. Marcus glanced at his son, whose eyes were fixed on the floor, his jaw tight with anger and humiliation. "Both boys will receive in-school suspension for 3 days, Dr. Chun continued. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence, regardless of provocation." Marcus nodded. "I understand. And the other boy, he'll be disciplined for his comments as well." "We've spoken with Ryan and his parents about appropriate language and respect for others, Dr. Chun confirmed. After signing the necessary paperwork, Marcus led a silent Eli to the car. They drove in heavy silence for several blocks before Marcus spoke. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Eli stared out the window. He said, "My mom was probably glad she died so she didn't have to deal with me anymore." Marcus felt a surge of rage so powerful it momentarily blinded him. He pulled the car over, needing a moment to compose himself before he could trust his voice. "Eli," he said finally, turning to face his son. "I'm sorry that happened." What that boy said was cruel and completely untrue. Eli's eyes filled with tears he was clearly fighting to contain. "You don't know that. You didn't even know her." "I know she loved you," Marcus said firmly. "Everything you've told me about her, every story, every memory, it's clear she adored you. She made you the center of her world." A tear escaped, trailing down Eli's cheek. "I miss her so much," he whispered, the words breaking in his throat. Without thinking, Marcus reached across the center console and pulled Eli into an awkward but fierce embrace. To his surprise, Eli didn't resist. Instead, he seemed to collapse, his thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I know," Marcus murmured, his own throat tight. "I know you do." They sat like that, the bustling city moving around their parked car until Eli's tears subsided. As they pulled apart, Marcus made a decision. "Let's go get ice cream," he suggested. Eli looked at him in confusion. "Aren't you mad about the suspension?" "Fighting isn't the answer," Marcus said carefully. "But standing up for your mother's memory? I can't be angry about that. Just, maybe use words next time instead of fists." A ghost of a smile touched Eli's lips. That's what Mom would have said. That evening, Frank found Marcus in his office, staring out at the city lights. "Rough day?" Janitor asked, noting Marcus's distracted expression. "Eli got into a fight at school," Marcus explained. "Another boy said something cruel about his mother." Frank nodded solemnly. "That would do it." "I didn't punish him," Marcus admitted. "I took him for ice cream instead. Probably not what parenting books would recommend." To his surprise, Frank smiled. "Sometimes the heart knows better than any parenting book." "He cried," Marcus said quietly. "Really cried. For the first time since he's been with me. It was like a dam broke." "That's progress," Frank observed. "Tears mean trust. He feels safe enough to be vulnerable with you." Marcus hadn't thought of it that way, but Frank's perspective shifted his understanding of what had happened. "Not a breakdown, but a breakthrough." "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Marcus said, changing the subject. "The board is hosting its annual Thanksgiving luncheon next week before the holiday. Would you join us? As my guest?" Frank looked startled. "At the board luncheon? That's not really my place, Mr. Reed." "It is, if I say it is," Marcus replied with gentle firmness. "And please, it's Marcus. After everything, I think we're well past formalities." Frank hesitated, then nodded. "I'd be honored." "Thank you." The day of the board luncheon arrived, bringing with it a nervous energy that surprised Marcus. He'd hosted these events for years without a second thought, yet now he found himself concerned about how the board would receive Frank, how Frank would feel among the power brokers of Horizon Industries. The private dining room at Le Cirque was arranged as it always was, a long table set with fine china and crystal, place cards marking each director's seat. Marcus had placed Frank's card beside his own at the head of the table. When the directors began to arrive, their surprise at finding the company janitor among them was poorly concealed. Eleanor, however, greeted Frank warmly, having heard enough from Marcus to understand the man's importance. As the meal progressed, the conversation flowed around market trends and year-end projections. Frank remained mostly quiet, observing the dynamics with thoughtful attention. It wasn't until dessert was served that Marcus gently steered the conversation direct. "Before we conclude," he said, his voice carrying the natural authority that had served him well for decades, "I wanted to share some reflections on gratitude, given the approaching holiday." The board members turned attentive eyes toward him, accustomed to his traditional Thanksgiving remarks, which usually centered on the company's achievements and future goals. "This year has brought unexpected changes to my life," Marcus continued. "As you all know, I recently discovered I have a son. What you may not know is how unprepared I was for that responsibility, how completely out of my depth." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Marcus Reed admitting vulnerability? It was unprecedented. "I've built a global corporation," he went on, "navigated economic crises, outmaneuvered competitors, secured billions in capital, but none of that prepared me for the challenge of connecting with a grieving 14 boy who had just lost his mother and was suddenly living with a stranger." Marcus glanced at Frank, whose eyes held steady encouragement. "I found guidance in an unexpected place," Marcus said, gesturing toward Frank, "from a man who has cleaned my office for 17 years. A man whose wisdom about fatherhood, about what truly matters, has changed not only how I parent, but how I lead." The board members shifted their gaze to Frank, seeing the janitor anew. "I asked Frank once, 'How did you learn to be a father?'" Marcus continued. His answer was simple, but it stayed with me. He said, "I didn't learn all at once. I learned day by day. Sometimes I got it right. Many times I got it wrong." Marcus paused, letting the words settle. That humility, that willingness to acknowledge imperfection while continuing to show up, day after day, it's a kind of leadership I hadn't considered before, a kind I'm trying to learn. He looked around the table at the men and women who had helped build Horizon, who had supported his vision and sometimes challenged it. "As we approach Thanksgiving, I find myself grateful not just for our success, our growth, our innovation, but for the unexpected lessons, the humbling moments, the chance to begin again." His voice softened. "And I'm grateful to each of you for your patience as I navigate this new chapter." To Marcus's surprise, as James Harrington, the director who had questioned his rescheduled board meeting, who spoke first. "I have a son too," he said, his typically brusque voice uncharacteristically gentle. "He's 28 now. I miss so many moments, games, graduations, ordinary days, chasing the next deal. The next promotion. He glanced at Frank, then back to Marcus. If someone had given me the wisdom your friend offered you, perhaps I wouldn't be trying so hard now to rebuild what I neglected then, one by one. Other board members shared similar reflections, regrets about prioritizing work over family, appreciation for Marcus's transparency, acknowledgement of their own struggles, balancing achievement with presence. Diana Chun, her eyes suspiciously bright, raised her glass. To Frank, she said, for reminding us what truly matters. As glasses were lifted around the table, Marcus caught Frank's eye. The janitor's expression held no pride or self-importance, only the same quiet dignity that had first drawn Marcus's attention that late evening in his office. A dignity that came not from position or wealth, but from a life richly lived, from wisdom hard-earned through love and loss and showing up day after day. The week before Thanksgiving, Marcus and Eli boarded a private jet to Seattle. As the plane rose above the Manhattan skyline, Marcus noticed Eli's face pressed to the window, watching his new home recede beneath them. There was excitement in the boy's expression, but something else too. Attention, and uncertainty about returning to a place that would be both achingly familiar and irrevocably changed. You okay, Marcus asked? Eli nodded. Just weird, you know? Going back. I can imagine, Marcus said, though in truth, he couldn't fully comprehend the complexity of Eli's emotions. If it gets overwhelming at any point, just let me know. We can take a break. Step away for a bit. Thanks, Eli said, and the simple acknowledgement felt like progress. The jet landed at SeaTac Airport under a typical Seattle drizzle. As they drove through the city in their rental car, Eli became an impromptu tour guide, pointing out landmarks from his previous life, his school, the park where he'd learned to ride a bike, the ice cream shop his mom would take him to after doctor appointments. And that's our apartment building, he said as they passed a modest complex in Fremont. Third floor, corner unit. You could see the water from our living room on clear days. Marcus slowed the car, taking in the ordinary building that had been the setting for Eli's childhood. Do you want to stop? We could go in, see if the manager would let us look around. Eli considered this, then shook his head. No, not yet, maybe. I don't know if someone else is living there now. It would be weird. They continued to the hotel Marcus had booked, a luxury property downtown, worlds away from the apartment Eli had described. After checking in, Eli flopped onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. Diane invited us for dinner tonight, he said, if that's okay. Of course, Marcus replied, unpacking his suitcase with military precision. I'm looking forward to meeting her. Eli sat up. Just ... Don't expect anything fancy. It's not like your New York restaurants. I don't need fancy, Marcus assured him. I want to meet the people who matter to you, not critique their dining arrangements. Diane Kostova lived in the same apartment complex where Eli and Jennifer had lived. Her unit was one floor down, a cozy two-bedroom filled with plants, books, and eclectic art collected from her travels as a freelance photographer. She greeted them at the door with a warmth that immediately set Marcus at ease. She was a tall, striking woman in her early 40s. With short silver-streaked hair and vibrant blue eyes. Eli, she exclaimed, enveloping the boy in a fierce hug. God, I've missed you. Eli hugged her back, his face briefly buried in her shoulder. When they separated, Diane turned to Marcus, her gaze appraising but not unfriendly. And you must be Marcus Reed, she said, extending her hand. I've been curious about you for 14 years. The feeling is mutual. Marcus replied, finding himself drawn to her directness. Though I've only been curious for a few months. Diane laughed, a rich, throaty sound. Fair enough. Come in, both of you. Dinner's almost ready. The apartment was filled with the aroma of something savory and homemade. As Diane led them inside, Marcus noticed photos covering one wall and in many of a woman with Eli's eyes and smile. Jennifer, I hope you like paella, Diane said, moving toward the kitchen. It was Jen's favorite. I make it every year for her birthday. I've never had it, Marcus admitted. Mom tried to make it once, Eli volunteered, a small smile playing at his lips, but she burned the rice. We ordered pizza instead. Your mother could do many things brilliantly, Diane said fondly. Cooking was not one of them. As they sat around Diane's small dining table, the conversation flowed more easily than Marcus had anticipated. Diane had known Jennifer since college, had been her roommate, her confidant, her sister in all but blood. She spoke of her with a casual affection that made her feel present, alive in the stories. She was terrified when she found out she was pregnant. Diane told Marcus over a glass of wine after Eli had excused himself to use the bathroom. Not because she didn't want the baby, she wanted him immediately, fiercely, but because she didn't know how to tell you. Marcus set down his fork. Why didn't she? Diane considered him thoughtfully. You have to understand, the Marcus Reed she knew was laser focused on building his company. You were working 20-hour days, sleeping in your office. She didn't think there was room in your life for a family. The truth of this stung, but Marcus couldn't deny it. She was probably right, he admitted. Back then I wouldn't have known how to be a father, and now? Diane asked, her gaze direct. Now I'm learning, Marcus said simply, day by day. Not always getting it right, but showing up. Something in Diane's expression softened. That's a good answer. When Eli returned, Diane brought out a photo album. I thought you might want to see these, she said, placing it on the table. I found some old pictures of your mom from before you were born. They gathered around the album, turning pages filled with snapshots of a younger Jennifer laughing on a beach, serious in graduation robes, making a silly face at the camera from a coffee shop. And then, startlingly, a photo of Marcus and Jennifer together at what appeared to be a company party. They stood side by side, champagne glasses in hand, both looking young and impossibly bright with ambition and possibility. I didn't know this picture existed, Marcus said softly. Jen kept it, Diane said, in her box of important things. Eli stared at the photo, at these two young people who had created him, who had once stood together before their paths diverged. You looked happy, he said. We were, Marcus replied, memories surfacing that he'd long buried beneath the pressing demands of building his empire. Your mother was brilliant. She challenged me, made me laugh. She saw the world differently than I did. The moment held a peculiar weight, three people connected by a woman no longer present, yet somehow filling the room with her absence. Later, as they prepared to leave, Diane pulled Marcus aside. I have something for you, she said, handing him a small, worn envelope. Jen wrote this after she was diagnosed. She asked me to give it to you if you ever came into Eli's life. Marcus stared at the envelope, his name written in unfamiliar handwriting. Thank you, he managed. She didn't hate you, you know. Diane said quietly. She just thought you both wanted different things, and maybe you did back then. Back at the hotel, after Eli had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone in the suite's living area, turning the unopened envelope in his hands. Finally, he took a deep breath and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Jennifer's neat, flowing script. Asterisk Marcus, asterisk asterisk, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found your way to our son. I've thought about this moment for 14 years, wondered if it would ever come, if you would ever know him, if he would ever know you. Asterisk, asterisk, I should have told you about him. That's my greatest regret. At the time, it seemed like the kindest choice for everyone. You were building something remarkable, something that demanded your whole self. A child would have been an unfair burden to place on those ambitions. Asterisk, asterisk, but children have a way of changing us, of rearranging our priorities in ways we never imagined possible. Eli has been the center of my universe, my greatest joy, my deepest purpose. And if you're reading this, then you're discovering that for yourself now. Asterisk, asterisk, I've told him about you. Not everything. How could I explain what I barely understood myself? But I've told him you're brilliant, driven, that you see possibilities others miss. I've told him he has your eyes, your analytical mind, your determination when something captures his interest. Asterisk, asterisk, I don't know what kind of father you'll be. I don't know if you'll love him immediately or if that love will grow slowly, like a seed that needs time and care. What I do know is that Eli deserves to be loved completely, to be seen fully, to be held in someone's heart as the miracle that he is. Asterisk, asterisk, be patient with him and with yourself. Forgive me for the choices I made, and know that despite everything, I never regretted those brief months with you. They gave me Eli, and he has been everything. Asterisk, asterisk, Jennifer, asterisk. Marcus lowered the letter, his vision blurred. In the quiet hotel room with the Seattle rain pattering against the window, he allowed himself to grieve for the woman he had barely known, for the years lost with his son, for the choices made by two young people who couldn't see beyond the horizons of their separate dream. The next morning, Thanksgiving Day, dawned clear and bright. By early afternoon, Marcus and Eli arrived at Diane's apartment, which was already buzzing with activity, just as Eli had described. Neighbors from throughout the building were gathering for the communal feast. A professor and his husband from the second floor, an elderly couple who had lived there for decades, a single mother with twin toddlers, a group of graduate students sharing a cramped unit on the top floor. Marcus, accustomed to rarefied environments of wealth and power, found himself oddly at ease among these strangers who had been part of Eli's extended family. He watched as his son moved through the gathering, accepted back into this community with embraces and exclamations over how he'd grown, with questions about New York and gentle inquiries about how he was coping. He's resilient, said a voice beside him. Marcus turned to find Diane, a glass of wine in hand. Like his mother, like you too, I'd guess. I never thought of myself that way, Marcus admitted. Ambitious, yes. Driven. But resilient implies something more. Human. Diane smiled. Well, you're here, aren't you? In a stranger's apartment, surrounded by people who knew your son when you didn't, facing all of that with grace. I'd call that resilience. As they gathered around tables pushed together in Diane's living room, Marcus found himself seated between Eli and an elderly man named Walter, who had apparently been a grandfather figure to Eli. So you're the father, Walter said without preamble, his voice gruff but not unkind. Jen always said the boy had your mind. Before Marcus could respond, Diane called for everyone's attention. Before we eat, she said, we have a tradition in this gathering. We go around the table and share something we're grateful for, and something we remember about those who can't be with us. The sharing began, moving around the table, gratitude for health, for community, for simple joys, and memories of Jennifer, her laugh, her kindness, her terrible puns, her fierce advocacy for her students at the community college where she'd taught. When it was Eli's turn, he hesitated. I'm grateful for ... single quotes. He glanced at Marcus for getting to know my dad, and I remember Mom singing in the kitchen while she made breakfast, even though she was really bad at it. Laughter rippled around the table, warm and inclusive. Then it was Marcus's turn. He looked around at these strangers who had loved his son, who had created a community where Eli had felt safe and seen. I'm grateful for all of you, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him, for being Eli's family when I couldn't be. And while I didn't know Jennifer as well or as long as the rest of you, I remember her kindness, her brilliance, and the extraordinary son she raised. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Eli approached Marcus, his expression thoughtful. "Dad," he said, the words still new between them, "can we go somewhere before we head back to the hotel? There's something I want to show you." Marcus followed Eli's directions, driving through Seattle's rain-slicked streets as evening settled over the city. The boy was quiet beside him, his face illuminated by passing streetlights, his expression unreadable. "Take a left here," Eli said as they approached a wrought iron gate. "It's just up ahead." Marcus slowed the car, realization dawning as they turned into the entrance of Lakeview Cemetery. The expanse of grounds stretched before them, peaceful and solemn under the darkening sky. "I haven't been here since the funeral," Eli said, his voice tight with emotion. "I wasn't ready before, but I think I think I need to come now. With you." Marcus nodded, understanding the significance of what Eli was offering. A chance to share this most private grief, to stand together at the place where Jennifer had been laid to rest. They parked and walked in silence through the winding paths, Eli leading the way with the confidence of someone who has memorized a route they never wanted to know. Finally, they stopped before a simple granite headstone, its surface still unmarked by time. "Jennifer Marie Collins, beloved mother, daughter, friend, her light lives on." Marcus stood slightly behind Eli, giving him space while remaining close enough to offer support if needed. For several minutes, the boy simply stood there, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched against more than just the evening chill. "I used to talk to her," Eli said finally. "After she died, before I came to New York, I'd close my eyes and imagine conversations. Tell her about my day, ask her questions." He glanced back at Marcus. "It's stupid, I know." "It's not stupid at all," Marcus said quietly. "It's a way of keeping her with you." Eli turned back to the headstone. "I couldn't do it anymore after I moved. It was like like I'd left her behind or something." His voice caught. "But now I'm back and I still can't find the words." Marcus moved forward, standing beside his son. "Would it help if I tried?" he offered. Eli looked up at him in surprise, then nodded. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling oddly vulnerable as he addressed the stone marker that represented a woman he had barely known, but who had changed his life immeasurably. "Hello, Jennifer," he began, his voice soft in the cemetery quiet. "I'm not sure what to say either. Thank you seems inadequate, but it's where I need to start. Thank you for Eli, for raising him to be thoughtful, intelligent, resilient, for giving him your kindness, your curiosity, your strength." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I wish I had known. I wish things had been different, but I can't change the past. All I can do is promise you that I'll do everything in my power to be the father he deserved. I'm learning day by day, sometimes getting it right, often getting it wrong, but I'm here. I'll always be here." As Marcus spoke, he felt Eli's hand slip into his, a small, tentative gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. They stood together, father and son, united in loss, but also in the possibility of what they might become to each other. "I miss you, Mom," Eli whispered. "I hope you'd be okay with how things are now." They remained at the graveside a while longer, the silence between them no longer strained but companionable, respectful of the moment they were sharing. When they finally turned to go, Marcus kept his hand on Eli's shoulder, a gentle, protective gesture that felt as natural as breathing. On the flight back to New York, Eli fell asleep, the emotional exhaustion of the trip finally catching up to him. Marcus watched his son's peaceful face, struck by how young he looked in sleep, how vulnerable. He thought of Jennifer's letter, of her hope that he would come to see Eli as the miracle he was. Looking at the boy now, Marcus realized it had happened without his noticing. Somewhere amid the awkward conversations and tentative connections, Eli had become the most important person in his world. Back in New York, life resumed its rhythm, but with subtle shifts. Their penthouse felt more like home after the trip to Seattle, as if acknowledging the past had somehow made the present more substantial. Eli spoke more freely about his mother, sharing memories without the hesitation that had marked earlier conversation, and Marcus found himself thinking differently about his role, not just as a parent but as a leader at Horizon Industries. The influence of Frank's wisdom and Marcus's evolving priorities began to ripple through the corporate culture. The board had approved a series of family-friendly policies that Marcus had proposed: flexible work hours, enhanced parental leave, a subsidized on-site childcare center for employees. "You're changing the company," Eleanor observed during a meeting about these initiatives. "For the better, I think. I'm trying to align our practices with our values," Marcus replied. "If we talk about integrity and work-life balance but prioritizing their families, we're not living our truth." Eleanor smiled. "Frank's influence again." "In part," Marcus acknowledged, "but also Eli's. Becoming a father has made me see things differently." One evening in mid-December, Marcus arrived at his office to find Frank already there, dusting the bookshelves with his usual methodical care. "Frank," he greeted him warmly, "I've been meaning to talk to you. Eli and I are hosting a small Christmas dinner at our place. Nothing fancy, just a few people who've become important to us. We'd both like you to join us if you're available." Frank turned, his face lighting with a gentle smile. "I'd be honored." "Thank you. Actually," Marcus continued, "there's something else I wanted to discuss with you." He gestured for Frank to take a seat. Another boundary between CEO and janitor dissolved by the relationship they'd built. "I've been thinking about your role here at Horizon," Marcus said, "about how your wisdom has influenced not just me personally, but increasingly the company's direction." Frank looked wary. Read Marcusa, I'm just a janitor. I know my place. That's just it, Marcus replied. Your place has evolved, whether you recognize it or not. The board members ask about you. They reference your perspective in meetings. What would Frank say about this? Has become something of a touchstone. Frank shook his head, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. I haven't done anything special. You've done everything important, Marcus corrected him. You've reminded me what truly matters, and that has value beyond measure. He slid a folder across the desk. I'd like to create a new position at Horizon, Employee Wellness and Family Support Director. The role would involve helping shape policies that support our staff as whole people, not just workers. Consulting on childcare programs, family leave, work-life balance initiatives, being a voice for the human side of corporate life. Frank stared at the folder, not opening it. You want me to leave my job? To wear a suit and sit in meetings? Marcus laughed. The suit is optional, and you'd have an office, but I imagine you'd spend more time walking the floor, talking to people the way you always have, just with a different title, a different level of influence, and yes, a substantially different salary. I don't know what to say, Frank murmured. Say you'll consider it, Marcus replied. Talk it over with your family. There's no rush. Frank nodded, finally reaching for the folder. I will. Thank you for believing I could do something like this. As Frank gathered his cleaning supplies to continue his rounds, Marcus was struck by how far they'd both come from that first late-night conversation. The janitor had taught the CEO how to be a father, and in the process had helped reshape a corporate giant. It was a narrative no one would have predicted, least of all Marcus himself. That weekend, as New York prepared for Christmas, Marcus and Eli ventured into the heart of the holiday crowds to find a tree for their penthouse. It was Eli's idea, tradition from his life with Jennifer that he wanted to continue. Mom and I always got the biggest tree that would fit in our apartment, Eli explained as they wandered through a lot filled with fragrant pines. Sometimes we had to cut off the top to make it work, but she said that was part of the event. Marcus, who had always delegated holiday decorating to his assistant or interior designer, found himself oddly moved by the ritual of selecting a tree together. They debated the merits of various specimens, too sparse, too lopsided, too perfect to be interesting, until finally settling on a 7-foot Fraser fir with a charmingly asymmetrical shape. This is the one, Eli declared, circling the tree with the seriousness of an art critic assessing a masterpiece. It has character, Marcus agreed, arranging for delivery later that day. As they walked back toward their apartment, stopping for hot chocolate at Eli's request, Marcus noticed his son seemed contemplative. Everything okay? He asked. Eli nodded, wrapping his hands around his steaming cup. I was just thinking about how different everything is from last Christmas. Mom was sick, but we tried to pretend she wasn't getting worse. We did all the usual stuff, tree, presents, cookies, but it felt ... hollow somehow. He looked up at Marcus. This feels different. Not better exactly, just ... different. We're building something new, Marcus said, echoing Frank's words from months before. Not replacing what you had with your mom, but creating something alongside it. Yeah, Eli agreed. That's it, exactly. That evening, as they decorated the tree with a mix of high-end ornaments Marcus had ordered and a small box of sentimental decorations Diane had sent from Seattle, Eli suddenly asked, "Do you think Mom would be okay with how things are? With us?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Based on her letter and everything Diane told us about her, I think pleased. She wanted you to be happy, to be loved, to have stability and support. He hung a delicate glass star on a branch. What do you think? Eli was quiet for a moment. I think she'd like you more now than she did back then, he said with unexpected candor. You're different from the guy she knew. I am, Marcus agreed. Because of you, because of Frank, because sometimes life gives you a second chance to become the person you should have been all along. Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed New York into a glittering wonderland. The penthouse, once a showcase of minimalist luxury, had undergone its own transformation under Eli's influence. Twinkling lights framed the windows. Garlands draped the sleek furniture. Their asymmetrical tree stood proudly in the corner, adorned with an eclectic mix of ornaments that told the story of their evolving families, some from Eli's past with Jennifer, others newly purchased to mark their first Christmas together. Marcus moved through the kitchen with growing confidence, preparing for the small gathering they had planned. The guest list was deliberately intimate. Eleanor from the board, Diane, who had flown in from Seattle, Frank and his family, and a few of Eli's new friends from school. Need help? Eli asked. Wandering into the kitchen in the sweater Marcus had bought him, dark blue with constellations that glowed in the dark, a perfect blend of teenage cool and astronomical enthusiasm. You could set the table, Marcus suggested, checking the roast in the oven. I think I've got the food under control, mostly, Eli grinned, the expression coming more easily these days. Mom would be impressed. She could barely boil water. So I've heard, Marcus replied, returning the smile, though I'm not sure she'd be impressed by my cooking so much as surprised. I know where the kitchen is. These casual references to Jennifer had become part of their language, a way of acknowledging her continued presence in their lives. No longer painful landmines to be avoided, but bridges connecting their separate pasts to their shared present. As Eli arranged plates and silverware with teenage approximation of precision, Marcus found himself pausing to observe him. The boy who had arrived 4 months ago, guarded, grief-stricken. A stranger had gradually revealed himself to be thoughtful, quietly funny, passionate about his interests, and remarkably resilient. Not unlike his mother, from what Marcus had learned. Not unlike Marcus himself, though in gentler, more balanced ways. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. I'll get it, Eli called, heading for the foyer. Frank and his family were the first to arrive, his wife, Grace, a warm, no-nonsense woman who immediately offered to help in the kitchen. His daughter Sophia, the once colicky baby who had grown into a poised elementary school teacher. His older son Michael, the doctor who had once been the angry 14-year-old in the photograph. And his younger son David, who worked in community development in the Bronx. They brought with them the easy affection of a family accustomed to gathering, to belonging together. Marcus welcomed them with a warmth that would have surprised his business associates. "Frank," he said, clasping the older man's hand, "thank you for coming. All of you." Frank's eyes crinkled with pleasure. Wouldn't have missed it. And everyone wanted to meet the famous Eli we've heard so much about. Eli ducked his head, a hint of shyness emerging at being the center of attention, but he greeted Frank with genuine happiness. In the months since their first meeting, the janitor had become something of a touchstone for both father and son, a source of wisdom, perspective, and uncomplicated acceptance. Eleanor arrived next, bringing expensive wine and a thoughtfully chosen gift for Eli, a high-quality telescope more powerful than his beginner model. "For stargazing from your rooftop," she explained as he unwrapped it. "The city lights make it challenging, but on clear nights you might be surprised what you can see." Diane came bearing a small suitcase full of Seattle specialties: coffee, smoked salmon, artisanal chocolate sand, more treasures from Eli's past life. "I found these in my storage closet," she told him, handing over a shoebox filled with school projects, drawings, and photographs. "I thought you might want them for your room here." Eli's friends arrived in a flurry of teenage energy and awkward politeness, clearly awed by the penthouse but quickly warming to the informal atmosphere Marcus had cultivated. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself observing the gathering with a sense of wonder. His home, once a pristine showcase designed to impress rather than welcome, was filled with conversation, laughter, the clatter of dishes, the layered interactions of people who were becoming, in their various ways, a kind of extended family. Frank's wife Grace had taken over the kitchen, directing the final stages of dinner preparation with cheerful authority. Eleanor and Diane had discovered a shared passion for photography and were deep in conversation by the tree. Frank's children had seamlessly integrated Eli and his friends into their circle, the age differences dissolving in the universal language of holiday celebration. "Quite a change from last year's Christmas Eve," Eleanor commented as Marcus refilled her wine glass. "As I recall, you were on a conference call with Tokyo until midnight." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the truth of this. "Different priorities now." "For the better," she said, raising her glass slightly. "Frank's influence, I presume?" "In large part," Marcus agreed, his gaze finding the janitor across the room, where he was entertaining the teenagers with what appeared to be a story that had them all laughing. "He saw something in me I didn't see in myself." When dinner was served, a feast that had benefited significantly from Grace's intervention, they gathered around the table that Marcus had expanded to accommodate everyone. The conversation flowed easily, crossing the boundaries of age, background, profession that would have seemed insurmountable in Marcus's previous life. "Before we eat," Frank said, rising from his seat, "I'd like to say something if that's all right." He looked to Marcus for permission, a small gesture that acknowledged him as host while subverting their workplace hierarchy. Marcus nodded, curious. "When I was a young father," Frank began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom, "I used to think my job was to have all the answers, to know exactly what to do in every situation, to never show doubt or fear." He smiled, shaking his head at his younger self. "I was wrong, of course. Being a father isn't about having answers. It's about being willing to search for them alongside your children." He turned to Marcus and Eli, his expression warm with affection for both of them. "What I've witnessed between you two these past months has been that, sir, honest. Sometimes difficult, but always moving toward each other rather than away. That's what family is at its heart. Not perfection, not uninterrupted harmony, but the commitment to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep building something together." Frank raised his glass. "To Marcus and Eli, and to Jennifer, whose love lives on in both of you." "To Marcus and Eli." The table echoed, glasses raised. Marcus felt Eli's hand slip into his under the table, a brief squeeze that conveyed what words could not. As he looked around at the faces gathered in his home, people from different worlds brought together by the unexpected journey of fatherhood, Marcus felt a completeness he had never known in all his years of achievement and acquisition. After dinner, as the party dispersed into smaller conversations throughout the apartment, Marcus found himself on the balcony with Frank. The snow had stopped, leaving the city draped in a pristine blanket that softened its hard edges. "Have you thought about my offer?" Marcus asked. "The new position at Horizon?" Frank nodded, his breath fogging in the winter air. "I have. My family and I have discussed it extensively, and, honored by your confidence in me," Frank said carefully. "Truly, but I need to decline." Marcus raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "May I ask why?" Frank leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. "I've spent 17 years moving through that building, observing, listening, connecting with people at every level. The moment I take an office, put on a suit, become management, that changes. The janitor sees things, hears things that the executive never will." He turned to face Marcus. "The wisdom you value in me comes from where I stand, not despite it. I think I can do more good with a mop in my hand than with a title on my door." Marcus considered this, recognizing the truth in Frank's assessment. "I hadn't thought of it that way, but I still want your influence in the company, your perspective in our decision-making, and you'll have it," Frank assured him, "just not from behind a desk." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city lights twinkle against the dark sky. "There is something I'd like to propose, though," Frank said. "A foundation, one that supports families in transitions, single parents, children who have lost a parent, families navigating unexpected changes." Marcus turned to him, intrigued. "What are you envisioning?" "Programs that provide practical help, childcare, legal assistance, counseling, but also mentorship, connecting people who have weathered similar storms with those just beginning their journey." Frank's eyes held a quiet passion. "What Eli needed 4 months ago was exactly what you needed, someone who had walked the path before, who could offer guidance without judgment." "The Reed Foundation," Marcus murmured, the idea taking shape in his mind. "No, the Reed Collins Foundation, to honor Jennifer as well." Frank smiled. "I'd be proud to help build that, to serve on its board, not as your employee but as your friend." The word hung in the cold air between them, friend. A simple term for the complex relationship that had developed between the billionaire CEO and the night shift janitor. "My friend," Marcus repeated, extending his hand. "I like that." As they sealed their new arrangement with a handshake, the balcony door slid open. Eli stepped out, wrapped in a new coat Marcus had given him as an early Christmas gift. "Dad? Frank? Everyone's asking for you. Diane's about to tell the story of Mom's disastrous attempt to make a gingerbread house, and she says you both should hear it." "We're coming," Marcus said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder as they turned to go inside. In the warmth of the penthouse, surrounded by the makeshift family they had gathered, Marcus caught Eli looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, not quite happiness, which was still tempered by grief, but a solid content, a sense of security that hadn't been there when he first arrived. It was, Marcus realized, the same feeling growing in his own heart, this certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not as CEO and son, not as guardian and ward, but as father and son, learning day by day what that truly meant. Spring came to New York with a gentle persistence, coaxing green from the city's parks and softening the harsh lines of skyscrapers with morning mist. In Marcus Reed's office on the 58th floor of Horizon Tower, the windows stood open to admit the fresh air, change that his staff had noted with quiet surprise. The CEO, who once maintained a climate-controlled environment as precise as his schedule, was evolving in ways both subtle and profound. It was late afternoon when Marcus's assistant announced that Frank Wilson was there to see him. "Send him in," Marcus said, setting aside the quarterly reports he'd been reviewing. Frank entered, no longer in his janitor's uniform, but in casual slacks and a button-down shirt, though he had declined the executive position Marcus had offered. He had agreed to a modified role, officially as a consultant for employee wellness initiatives, unofficially as the soul and conscience of Horizon Industries. "I brought the final proposal for the foundation," Frank said, placing a folder on Marcus's desk. "The lawyers have reviewed everything. We can launch next month, as planned." Marcus nodded, a sense of satisfaction warming him. The Reed Collins Foundation had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed, fueled by his resources and Frank's vision. Soon it would begin its work supporting families navigating loss and transition, creating a network of mentorship and practical assistance. "How's Eli?" Frank asked, taking a seat across from Marcus. "Good," Marcus replied, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "He made the honors science team at school. They're competing in the state finals next week. You'll be there, I see." "Front row," Marcus confirmed. "I've cleared my schedule for the entire day." Frank smiled, the expression conveying approval without words. "And the college visits?" "We're touring MIT and Caltech next month." Eli's leaning toward astrophysics. Marcus shook his head in wonder. "He's only 15, but he already knows exactly what he wants to study." "He has direction," Frank observed, "and support. That's a powerful combination." They discussed the foundation's plans for a while longer, the conversation flowing with the ease of true collaboration. As they finished, Frank glanced at his watch. "I should go. Sophia's birthday dinner is tonight." "Of course," Marcus said, rising to walk him out. "Please give her my best." At the door, Frank paused. "I almost forgot. I brought something else for you." He reached into his bag and withdrew a small wrapped package. "Happy Father's Day." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Father's Day isn't until Sunday." "I know," Frank said with a gentle smile, "but I wanted to give you this privately." Marcus accepted the package with a curious expression. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed a simple wooden frame containing a photograph, not a professional portrait, but a candid shot taken at their Christmas gathering. It showed Marcus and Eli on the balcony of their penthouse, snowflakes falling around them as they stood shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the city. Their profiles were illuminated by the soft glow from inside, highlighting the striking similarity between them. But it was their expressions that caught Marcus's heart, a shared look of peaceful contentment, of belonging. "Diane took it," Frank explained. "She sent it to me a few weeks ago. I thought you might want it for your desk." Marcus stared at the image, momentarily unable to speak, and all the photos that had adorned his office over the years, shaking hands with presidents, receiving awards, standing before company logos at product launches. None had captured anything like the quiet joy evident in this simple moment with his son. "Thank you," he managed finally, his voice rough with emotion. Frank nodded, understanding all that remained unsaid. You've come a long way, Marcus. Both of you have. After Frank left, Marcus remained standing by the window, the photograph in his hands. He thought of that night months ago when Eli had first arrived, the awkward silence, the unbridgeable distance, the fear that had gripped him as he faced a responsibility for which he felt completely unprepared. He thought of Frank, entering his office with a mop and a quiet dignity, offering wisdom that had changed the course of his life. Asterisk children don't need perfect fathers. They need present one. Asterisk. He thought of Jennifer, who had raised their son with love and courage, who had somehow instilled in him a resilience that had allowed him to adapt to his new life, to gradually open his heart to the father he had never known. A knock at his door interrupted these reflections. Marcus turned to find Eli standing there, backpack slung over one shoulder, his lanky frame filling out as he approached his 16th birthday. "Hey, Dad," he said, entering with the casual confidence of someone secure in their welcome. "I thought we could grab dinner before my study group, if you're not too busy." 6 months ago, Marcus would have been too busy, would have delegated dinner to his housekeeper or offered to send a car service. Now he smiled and set the photograph on his desk, positioning it prominently beside his computer. "I'm never too busy for you," he said, meaning it completely. As they left the office together, Marcus found himself thinking of the question Eli had asked in Seattle. Asterisk, how did you do it? Go from that house in Millfield to all this. Asterisk, the answer he'd given then had been honest but incomplete. One day at a time, with help, without a loan. All true, but missing the heart of the transformation. The real answer, he realized now, was simpler and more profound. You change. You grow. You learn to see beyond the narrow confines of your own ambitions to the wider possibilities of a life richly lived. You discover that true success isn't measured in acquisitions or achievement, but in connections, in the ability to be present, to listen, to love without condition or expectation. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood at a podium in the atrium of Horizon Tower, addressing the gathered crowd at the official launch of the Reed Collins Foundation. Board members, employees, media representatives, and invited guests filled the space. But Marcus's eyes found only 4 faces in the audience: Eli, standing tall and proud; Frank, his quiet wisdom a steadying presence; Eleanor, whose belief in Marcus had never wavered; and Diane, representing the thread of connection to Jennifer's memory. "Today we begin a new chapter," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. "Not just for Horizon Industries or for me personally, but for the families this foundation will serve. Families facing transitions, navigating loss, building new futures from challenging beginning." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I became a father last year, I was utterly unprepared. I had built skyscrapers, but I didn't know how to build a relationship with my son. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals, but I couldn't navigate a simple conversation about school or friends or the grief of losing his mother." The crowd was silent, captivated by this unprecedented vulnerability from the normally stoic CEO. "What saved me, what saved us, was the wisdom of someone who understood what truly matters. Someone who reminded me that being present is more important than being perfect. That showing up day after day is the essence of both parenthood and leadership." Marcus gestured to Frank in the audience. "Frank Wilson taught me how to be a father when I was lost. His wisdom will now guide this foundation as we seek to provide that same kind of mentorship to other families in transition." As the audience applauded, Marcus caught Eli's eye. The young man really gave him a small nod of approval, a gesture that meant more than any business accolade ever had. Later, as the reception wound down, Marcus found himself in a quiet corner with Frank, watching Eli across the room as he engaged confidently with board members and foundation partners. "I never thanked you properly," Marcus said, "for that first conversation in my office, for seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself." Frank shook his head. "It was always there," he replied. "You just needed someone to remind you to look for it." "Still," Marcus persisted, "you've changed my life, changed Eli's life. I don't know where we'd be if you hadn't been willing to speak truth to power that night." Frank smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way that had become so familiar, so reassuring. "That's the thing about wisdom, Marcus. It doesn't come from power or position. It comes from living, from loving, from losing and rebuilding, from showing up day after day, whether you're a CEO or a janitor or a father trying his best." Across the room, Eli caught Marcus's eye and gestured for him to join a conversation with one of the foundation's new youth advisors. Marcus nodded, turning back to Frank. "He needs me," he said simply. "Yes," Frank agreed. "And you need him. That's how family works. That's how it's always worked." As Marcus moved across the crowded atrium toward his son, he felt a profound sense of rightness, of completion. The journey from that first desperate plea asterisk, "teach me how to be a father" asterisk, to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. There had been missteps and breakthroughs, tears and laughter, the gradual, often painful process of becoming the father Eli deserved. But they had made it, day by day, presence by presence. They had built something neither of them could have imagined 8 months ago when a grieving boy arrived in New York to live with a stranger who happened to be his father. They had built a family, not perfect, not without challenges, but genuine and resilient, a testament to Frank's simple wisdom. Asterisk children don't need perfect father. They need present ones. Asterisk as Eli introduced him to the young advisor with evident pride. This is my dad, Marcus Reed. Marcus felt the words wash over him like a benediction. My dad, the simplest title he had ever held, and by far the most significant. In that moment, surrounded by the foundation that would extend Frank's wisdom to countless other families, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that of all the empires he had built, all the wealth he had amassed, all the power he had wielded, nothing would ever matter more than this: being present, being worthy of those two small words, my dad, the most important title he would ever earn, one day at a time.